Everyone to tonight's study session and our discussion on our 5-year transit implementation plan. Dwayne, are you going to lead us off here?
Yes, I'm going to kick it off.
You'll kick it off? Okay.
So with me tonight is Irene Higgs, Executive Director of the Sun Quarter MPO, and Amy Moran from Wilson & Company. Amy will, as usual, be doing most of the talking tonight. So tonight we're looking for direction in proceeding with the transit system. But before we get started, I wanted to mention that we did get designation from the governor to receive the 5307 transit funds. So that's something we've been working on for a couple of years, and it's really
that's
nice
awesome.
to
Good
have
news.
that behind us.
Great news.
So the last time we were here, we presented 3 options on microtransit. Tonight, we're just bringing you our recommended option out of those 3. And Amy will explain why we picked that particular option.
Thanks, Dwayne.
Send in the big guns.
Well, Mr. Mayor and members of the council, I'm happy to be back here again to one more time talk to you about the direction we are selecting as preferred for the city of Casa Grande as it relates to providing transit service. I'm going to just give a little refresher, information that may be familiar to you that we talked about previously about what the study background and the goals are. And then we'll just talk about what we think the potential 5-year implementation scenario might look like. So if you recall, there was a previous study completed in 2019. That was a pretty comprehensive study, a lot of outreach, a lot of feedback from stakeholders and the public. And in that particular study, it actually really focused on providing fixed route service. As Dwayne mentioned, since that study, the city actually has been officially designated as a 5307 recipient, making it eligible for the 5307 funds moving forward, as well as the approximately $2.6 million that has been allocated from the CARES Act. So we took a look at that and we decided what is really probably going to be the most effective way to implement a transit system, trying to minimize the risk for the city. And that's when we kind of took a little bit of a turn from what was originally recommended in the 2019 study. And we said, well, let's look at microtransit and see what that might mean in terms of an alternative to fixed route service. And so just a reminder, when we talk about microtransit, it's a flexible on-demand shared ride service. Riders are going to specify their pickup locations and drop-off locations within a particular zone that's designated for the service. They can book in advance, they can book on the day of travel, typically using a computer, smart device application, or even by phone. The vehicles themselves will have to be equipped for wheelchairs in order to be compliant with ADA requirements.
How many pickup locations?
So when you're talking about a flexible on-demand, the pickup locations are limitless within a particular zone. So there's a service area or a zone that those vehicles would cover, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay. But essentially, as long as you are being picked up or dropped off within that zone, you are eligible to ride.
Thank you.
When we started looking at what we were targeting as the initial service area for this microtransit, we went back to the good work that had been done in the previous study, which really looked at all of those indicators for potential transit ridership. So one vehicle households, low income, key destinations, residential densities. And you can see here in the graphic is what was compiled as the 2025 composite transit demand. In other words, the areas that are kind of the darker purple are those that we would expect to see the highest number of either origins or destinations for transit ridership. We also decided from a microtransit perspective that ideally we'd like to achieve a 20 to 25 minute response time. So that means if you aren't ordering your vehicle in advance and you go on, similar to maybe what you might do if you call a taxi or order an Uber or a Lyft, you go on, you order the ride, and the goal would be that vehicle would be there within a 20 to 25-minute time frame. We did want to minimize reliance on Uber, Lyft, or taxis because we know that they're a bit scarce here currently in Casa Grande. So we didn't want to rely on that, which many systems do. And again, as I mentioned when we started, we wanted to look at an option that would use the CARES Act funds to the greatest extent possible in those early years. Well, there's not an expiration on those CARES monies currently. There's always a big question mark. And the guidance that we're hearing from the Federal Transit administrative representatives is it's in the best interest to go ahead and get those monies programmed. If they are programmed, the likelihood of those being then taken back is much lower. So you may recall when we, I think, first initially met with you, we talked about this initial zone. And when we first talked about it, it did not have what is kind of that little finger that heads to the north that goes up to the Boys and Girls Center. And so we've revised the service area to include that based on the feedback that we heard from everybody. We also, if you recall, looked at a couple options of whether it would be better for contractors to provide the full service or have Casa Grande purchase vehicles and operate the service here within the city. And the conclusion that was drawn was that it was more cost effective to have contract service, at least in the initial years. What that gets you basically is some time to learn about what that ridership might be. What are those origins and destinations? It allows a little bit of flexibility, settle in, get comfortable with the service, have somebody else kind of take on the burden of figuring out how to operate it. And then, of course, there's time to evaluate after 4 or 5 years down the road and see which direction you might want to go if it's something you want to bring back in-house. Again, in order to maintain that 20 to 25-minute response time that we talked about initially, we would need to have 3 vehicles in service. We looked at a couple options where we said, well, what if we provide 12 hours of service or 8 hours of service, Saturday service? You may recall that as well. We looked at a variety of options one of the times that we spoke to you, and where we landed was we thought it best to provide Monday to Friday service for 12 hours, so from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Some of the other options that we looked at had shorter service hours, obviously would cut some of the costs, but our thought here was with those longer service hours, we're better capturing those peak employment times. So those people who kind of work a normal, say 8 to 4, 9 to 5 job, the service would be operating as opposed to running at a shorter time frame and cutting off those end hours. And regardless of the option we chose, if it was run by the city in-house or if it was going to be run by a contractor, there would be a need to hire a new transit manager as a city staff position. You might wonder, what are those folks going to do if somebody else is operating the service? Well, I assure you there's a lot of coordination that's involved. There's a lot of reporting requirements for the FTA in order to receive their funds. So there's certainly a lot of work that would be needed by a city staff employee. And so when we look at costs here in a little bit, keep in mind that those costs would also include the cost of that full-time staff member. So here's the cost of the preferred option. You can see it's running between $700,000 and $900,000 annually. You might wonder why that changes. Well, we did factor in some nominal inflation, recognizing that 5 years from now it's going to cost more to provide the service, it's going to cost more to pay people. So we wanted to make sure that we were taking that into account. Next column you can see is the CARES funding. What we did here was we, to the greatest extent possible, utilized those CARES funds in the early years. And that CARES money is sufficient, we're estimating, to get through 4 full years of service. And then start drawing down on the 5307 grant share. So you can see in year 5 about $400,000 in 5307 grants. In the first 4 years, when you're taking down that CARES money, there's still a local contribution of about $100,000 annually. Really, that's just a conservative estimate to offset the costs for that transit manager position that would not be eligible for CARES funding. There are certain administrative functions that that person would need to do that are tied to requirements to pull down that grant from the FTA that the FTA will not reimburse for. When we get into year 5, that's when you can start to understand moving forward what those potential costs of that initial zone operating Monday through Friday with 3 vehicles for 12 hours a day would cost. It's about $450,000 to $500,000 local contribution, and again, about a $400,000 FTA grant share. So as Dwayne mentioned, what we're here today really, I guess, is to ask any further questions that you may have to make sure you're fully understanding what we're thinking the best path forward might be, and to get your direction as to whether you think this preferred service scenario seems like a good plan, understand the need for hiring a full-time transit manager, and then really the next steps, if there's a consensus that this all sounds like a good direction forward, to think about preparing that request for proposals in order to get a contract service provider on board. I will say that that request for proposals is a heavy lift. I think those documents, correct me if I'm wrong, are about 100 pages long because of all the FTA requirements. So current staff, or if the new transit manager comes on board, they're going to have to spend a lot of time working with Federal Transit to make sure that they've got all the correct language and legal requirements in there, so that they are eligible for that 5307 reimbursement and CARES Act money. So that's my short presentation, and I'm happy to entertain any questions you may have.
Amy, I have a question. So this, if we do this micro service version and we do it in that mapped area, it should give us some data, right? I mean, we can pull some data over the 3 years or so that'll tell us where that ridership's going, right? So if at some point in time we don't like this version and we wanted to go to a fixed version, it might help us design where that fixed version needs to go to service the most people.
Absolutely. So the beauty of modern technology would allow you to collect ridership data, so how many people are actually using the service, but also track what are the primary origins and destinations of that service.
GPS movement, all that stuff.
What's that?
GPS movement. Would they use that?
No, I think what they use is more of a tracking service that would track the locations where folks are picked up and the locations where folks are dropped off, and count the number of riders.
That is a GPS.
Oh, but they wouldn't necessarily track the paths that they're taking.
I know, maybe we want to.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Bob.
Well, a question on that map about the approved or identified zone. Am I understanding that the pickups and drop-offs outside of that zone wouldn't be?
So the service would have to both originate, so somebody would have to be picked up inside of that orange area and dropped off. Now, it wouldn't preclude somebody who lives 2 blocks away to walk and say, pick me up at the Quick Trip or whatever the case may be. But it would be limited to that zone.
Okay. And I get, this may be a rhetorical question, but if we simply said the city limits of Casa Grande is our pickup and drop-off zone, how big of a bite is that? Is that unmanageable? We don't think we could do it?
I will tell you it would be very expensive, and I would suspect that there would be a large portion of the city limits that would have very low ridership. So we established this initial zone based on those areas where we think that there's the greatest potential for people to not only need a ride, but also reach their destination within that zone.
Okay.
And then did we look at Tuesday through Saturday or any other alternatives other than Monday through Friday? I mean,
well, so I will tell you, it's basically, the costs that I'm sharing with you are for 5 days, 12 hours. It's based on the number of hours that you're running the service every week. So if you wanted to
could
go
go
Tuesday
Tuesday to
through
Saturday.
Saturday versus Monday through Friday, it would be the same.
okay.
How many people do those vehicles hold, the transit vehicles?
I think it depends on the type of vehicles that they would use. I would guess that it would probably be somewhere in the range of 8. It is a shared ride service, so you have.
Probably a van with a,
Yeah.
with a chairlift access.
Is there a fee to get on to it, or is it?
Well, that's entirely up to the city. What we initially recommended was that the first 6 months of service would be free to ride in order to help people understand it, attract the service, let them get used to it. And then we assumed a nominal fee of $1.50 per rider.
You know, the senior center used to send vans with some of the seniors up to Phoenix or Tempe to go to a play or something that was interesting. Can they leave ahead of time if they have people from the senior center that want to go to outside of our city limits?
So when you would set up the contract with the provider, it would be based on an understanding that this was the specified service area. So those vehicles would remain within the service area. So if there was a desire to go outside of the service area for that type of special event, you know, they might be able to get them to the pickup point of where that vehicle, separate vehicle might travel to take them up to Phoenix.
Health center, and then they can
Yeah.
go from there.
Well, that's where they usually left from.
No, this would be separate from that. though.
No, we're going to have to get another van for Dorothy Bell.
Don't we have one? I think we have one.
We used to, I don't know if we do now or
Lisa?
not.
Lisa? Yeah, we still do.
Well, first, I'm excited we're here. You know, it's just been such a long road, so I am excited that we're here, and it's something that we can test, and I think the data is going to be critical, Mayor. But I believe because of the funding that we, the resources that we have available, now's the time to try this. So, but of course, you know, we're going to get criticism from some people in the community because it's not, you know, hitting their particular neighborhood. But I think we have to remember, like you said, Amy, when we did this study a long time ago, that heat map is where it shows where the biggest demand is and need for this type of service. I had a couple questions, and if you can remind me, I know we had discussions about this in the past, but why aren't we going a little bit further west here to Walmart distribution? I know there was discussion last time you were here, but if you can explain that, well, explain that first, then I have another question.
Certainly. So we did talk about that. A couple of factors here. I think, number one, expanding that service area and trying to maintain that 20 to 25 minute response time probably would have required another vehicle to be in service, which is, of course, going to increase your costs. So that was one factor. I think the second factor was that, at least initially, we thought perhaps the greater level of ridership could occur closer to the end of the first 5-year period. And so this initial zone did a good job capturing what's on the ground today. And it would allow for that flexibility to revise it or expand it in the future once you have a greater understanding of the information. I think one of the other concerns also, at least until we have some better information, was whether or not those people at Lucid, for example, would be the types of people who would prefer to use transit service or need to use transit service versus having their own personal vehicle.
And then secondly, the hours, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., when you look at, it does go out to the hospital, you know, maybe that time period, because you have to look at shift changes. And since the hospital, I know it's usually a 7 a.m. shift to 7 p.m. shift, so, and I would imagine some people will be going out to the hospital. So that might be a time we might want to look at and see if we adjust it a little bit for people that are starting a 7 a.m. shift. I don't know. It's something if you took that into consideration. And then lastly, as far as connecting to some of the other services that are coming into town, so with your, what's the one in Coolidge called again?
Carts.
Carts and the Maricopa Transit, do they have other pickup locations where we could possibly, connect with them. So
Cart
they
does.
can, if cart goes to Fry's on Pinal, someone can get on the cart van and then come into our area, our zone. Is that possible?
It would be possible, because I believe there's a cart drop-off
County.
around the hospital.
And the county
And-
office.
Yeah,
And the
county office.
and the
But the
promenade.
county is in this zone, so
It's
but
in this
what's,
zone, yeah.
but what's north, so if someone is at the hospital and they live over by in Valago, so kind of close to, Fry's,
Can't go to
could they, do they cart pick up at Fry's at all?
No.
No.
That would be outside of this service area.
Okay,
They just come down Truckle and then go over to the county building.
Just
And
goes
then
up
come
to
down to
Cottonwood,
Pinal
yes.
and then go over to the hospital and
Oh,
promenade.
that's what cart does.
And then they go back
Okay.
out to like CAC and,
okay.
yeah, they just make a loop in, that's it.
But they do go to CAC, so at
Right.
least people in this area,
They could
if they,
get to a drop-off or
Yeah.
a pickup location for cart.
for cart, okay.
And they
I just
also
think
go
that
to
connectivity is important,
Yeah, they
and
get
and how
Florence
we
too,
can
and they get
communicate that.
Coolidge. so,
Right.
yeah.
And they have a drop-off at the courthouse in Florence, too.
Right, okay,
Yeah, and our courthouse here too.
right, okay.
Not our courthouse, but the county's
Okay, that was it. No, but I think it's great.
there.
Thank you.
Does anybody do they contact some of the bigger employers and see if they have an interest in having their people picked up at a certain point to come and picked up in the evening?
So I know when we did the
More like a ride
2019 study, part of that outreach included outreach to employers. And I think that we've captured several of the employers within the area. As far as developing or defining a deeper point of pickup at those employment areas, that has not been done yet. I would certainly think that might be something that would be worked out logistically as the service begins to unfold and discussions are underway with the contract provider. I will mention that, one of the things that we did consider, if you recall when we were talking about those out years, was, maybe this transit manager position, part of what they could do is reach out to those employers and understand what their needs are and possibly even see if they'd be willing to partner to kick in some money
Thornton Road
to
is
help
full of
support that.
people that have employees all the way down industrially. And it would sure be an opportunity if the people wanted
Yeah.
to get a
Yeah,
ride.
I
or-
think to Amy's point too, though, if we get that transit manager, then he can go out and contact Lucid and say, hey, do you want a ride share program? We can help coordinate it if, got enough people who sign up for it, and you're gonna help pay for it.
I will.
Lucid, I meant Lucid. We'll get Lucid to
Right.
help pay for it.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that-
Matt, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, so like my colleagues, that's one of my biggest concerns. And I've come a long way personally on transit because I was very against it, but now through lots of study, I can see something how it's manageable. But one of my huge concerns was that we're not hitting our biggest employers. We're hitting a lot of our small employers, which will help. But I work out in that area where the big employers are, not for them, but in that area. And traffic is getting really bad too. So this could be a solution for that. And we need to make sure that somebody does, because data is going to drive, in my opinion, data should drive this entire system.
You own Thornton Road.
Just a little Pete, no. But if, it's important to get that data because we need to see how much it costs per rider. I mean, if it's costing $10,000 per rider, then
It's not worth it.
it's something we can't afford to do. And I hope that people use it because the biggest thing I hear besides getting more housing for people is getting people to work and how they can get transportation and getting them to shopping areas, hospitals, stuff like that. And to the point of the cart, I think Walmart or someplace with a big parking lot would be a great thing where people could park there, plan on catching the ride there, right? And then going to the cart transfer and then going to Florence or
And I will-
CAC.
And I will say, Matt, on a separate conversation that I've had with CART, is that they're interested in tying in with what we build, but obviously they're gonna ask us to participate in some of their CART. Now, it won't be that expensive. It's like $25,000, I think, to be a member. So if we were a member, I know that they would work with us on locations.
Okay. And
And then
then,
we could kind of promote that with our transit system.
yeah, and that's good because that'll make it bigger without us spending a
Absolutely.
whole lot of
Yep,
money.
yep.
The other thing is that I'm glad to see that the rec center got included in this, in the Boys and Girls Club, because that's gonna be important. And I guess we're gonna have to make rules for agents, we spoke about that before, but I guess that comes later on at the contract period, as well as my other question is, the vans are gonna be branded CG Rides or whatever.
So I think that would
That would be more
be
towards the
negotiable
contract,
with the
right?
contractor.
Yeah, that's what I mean, that's answering my own question there, that would be at that point.
Rhetorical.
And so I've had a couple concerns from people, and personally, and the full-time employee, which I know was part of your presentation tonight, but if we're doing everything contract, why would we not have a contract employee? Because what if this only goes 3 years, 5 years? Would that be possible?
So you need to be very careful in order to maintain your eligibility for the 5307 program. One of the requirements is the ability to demonstrate that you have staff that are knowledgeable and efficient
Okay,
in acquiring that grant, providing oversight on the grant, and then reporting on how that grant is being used.
that,
And so there would be a lot of, I think, nuances, and to be honest, I think I have asked the question in the past, and it was not looked upon well. So the recommendation would be to have that person on staff in order to continue to be able to demonstrate that Casa Grande is capable.
for the long term. And that answers my question, so I mean, I'm asking the question to see, and you answered it very well. And lastly, another concern I've heard is that, are we making this transit system to fit the budget and not the needs? And I'll say, probably yes at first, right? Because that's what we're working within. But we just want to keep, again, with the data, the data to make sure that we're going the right places and doing the right things for everybody. And I'm sure, I'm just making a point, and we've all talked about it, so that's going to be very important. And maybe if we need another board or something, somebody that was a suggestion from somebody that I got, and says, two or three people that maybe, we have some boards and commissions, maybe that would help a lot, people to concentrate on it who are using the system or know about the system, so we could get more input from citizens.
We are forming a new community services board, and
Yeah.
that might fit right in.
It might
with
fit in there with that.
And because since we're going to sit down with Brett at some point in time and talk about job descriptions in that board, we could add that in.
That's a
there.
good idea, yeah, because that's something that's gonna be
We'll keep
important to hear from users and hear from people in the community. And are we gonna keep this under the, another concern, are we gonna keep it under Public Works, or are we gonna,
Where does this usually reside, under
is it gonna
Public
be under
Works?
Public Works, or?
So I was just asking Dwayne, I do believe in the past, as these studies have unrolled, and even at the beginning of this discussion about microtransit, there was a committee that was formed specific to that effort, so it could be a good starting point if you're looking to have a committee specifically related to transit. I do want to mention to your question about whether or not you're creating the system in response to the funding that's available or what the needs are. And so a couple of things. To your point, it's very important to understand what the needs are. Right now, we're doing our best as planners to give a good indication, but until you, as you said, get that data, you don't really know. And so I would, say to anybody who were to ask a couple of things. First of all, we're starting with this area which we believe to have the greatest need for the service. It gives us an opportunity to collect the data, and I will tell you historically, if you look at other areas that provide transit, they start small and they use that data to revise and expand their service area. It's a typical approach to providing transit rather than going all in a very large service area, spending more than you probably need to learn that you need to pull it back. And I think it's better to focus on the area where there's the greatest need and then potentially expand.
And it might go, shift the whole thing one way or the other way. And I appreciate that, and that's why I asked the question, because I figured, and to answer, we are fitting it to a budget because that's part of our job as well. You know,
Correct.
we have to work within
Correct.
that budget. So, and I agree with that, but I appreciate your answers to my questions, and thank you very much.
Certainly, no problem.
Just a couple things. I need some clarification on a couple things, but, and I think that we've all, received some notification from folks that have an interest in this. And I know that traffic is a big concern, and so we're trying to address that. And I think that we do have to, I agree with Matt, we have to have it within our budget because we can't provide a service and then take it away. We need to be constructive on that. The position that was mentioned, I want to make sure that we understand the qualifications needed on that position. And the reason for that is that we want to be competitive and have somebody good in that position, but if we can't pay them what they should be receiving for their qualifications, then we're going to have a problem right from the very beginning. So I want to make sure that I thought about the committee because I know that's been talked about. I caution that I think that it should be an advisory capacity because I think that if we have somebody that's going to be in that position, we need to allow them the flexibility to do their job with input from our community, but not to dictate, because I don't think that that's what we're after. And just a couple clarifications. One of the concerns was that what we're seeing today is not any really different than what we've seen in the past. So it's not of community need and the vision. And I guess, is there something specific here that you've talked about that is different? And if not, for that, for those people concerned about that, why not? Why is it not different?
So the big difference here is that in the past, that past 2019 study, it looked at fixed route service. So basically a bus that would run up and down Florence Boulevard every half hour or so and have fixed stops on just that road. That was what the initial kind of early 5-year action plan was. This particular service would be flexible and on demand. So instead of just capturing people who are able to walk to and from a bus stop on Florence Boulevard, they're getting picked up, if they live in that zone, they're getting picked up at their doorstep and they're getting dropped off at their destination. They're not tied to those specific spots and locations of bus stops along Florence Boulevard.
And I appreciate that. And the reason I ask for clarification is because there are some people that have been involved with this from the beginning, and then there are those that have been kind of spotty and they don't understand where we started versus where we're at. So I think that that's important. And then the other thing is the money that we're talking about, is it going to be competing with our city budget for monies for our roads? That was another concern, that we would be kind of competing against each other. And I didn't see that, but I guess I just need clarification on that.
Mayor, Councilwoman McBride, specifically to your question related to the competition amongst budgets, following our last study session, we had a considerable amount of dialogue as a staff and considered the comments and questions that were asked by the mayor and council at that point in time. That really drove the outcome of this particular proposal. The short answer to your question is, in the first 4 years, it does not compete. We ultimately are utilizing, in the first 4 years, we are ultimately utilizing the $2.5 million that we've received in CARES funding. Again, one of the primary goals that we established as a team is to, as has been articulated tonight, really give us the opportunity to better understand our community's needs through the collection of data. That does this with what I consider to be a very nominal investment on the part of the city, which is essentially funding those non-eligible costs through expenses through the federal government, which in this case is the transit manager. All of that was done with intention. I think, and I guess I'll make a point and I'll ask Amy or Dwayne to verify this. There's nothing to say that in year 2 that we can't begin to modify what this program looks like. And obviously, the mayor and council would ultimately be, as part of our budget process, as part of the consideration, would be asked to evaluate if we would want to make an additional in-kind contribution to pursue other types, to pursue the 5307 money as an example. But I think generally speaking, our goal as a staff and what we're presenting to the mayor and council this evening is to limit the amount of money that we would be contributing out of the city, so there's no competition with any other funds, and certainly not the streets fund, and utilize the $2.5 million that has been allocated to us through CARES to really study and establish what we consider to be the program that best fits our community's needs.
Larry?
Okay.
I would like
Go
to
ahead.
say
Go
that
ahead.
2.5 million of CARES Act funding can only be spent on transit. It's not available for anything
Right.
else.
And I just want to clarify for you all, I'm very much for it. I think that, we had a committee, and as a whole, the committee did a really good job, and you guys have done a great job. I'm very much for it. And we can only provide the best service, and it's up to our community to utilize what we offer. And so, by the fact that, we're having issues with traffic and those kind of things we're providing, it may not be the best, the grandiose, but we've got to start someplace, and you guys have given us the information that we can do that. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. Powell, you had a comment?
Yes, the insurance on the vehicle and anybody on there would be done by the city, I assume.
A contractor, probably.
Contract.
It'll be part of the contract with the contractor.
It is. The
I would assume
contractor
so.
would
It'd be
handle
part
it.
of that contract.
We'd have to
Sure,
negotiate.
they wouldn't be our vehicles, so.
Yeah, yeah, it's not our
Insurance
vehicle.
would be through the contractor.
That'd be negotiated in the contract, right?
That-
Yeah.
I would say yes, Mr.
Yeah.
Mayor.
Okay.
And Mr. Mayor, if I can go back to the question by Councilwoman McBride specifically related to the competition, there obviously, when you move into the transit programming, there, as you can see under this particular proposal, in year 5, if we would ultimately be, our investment from the community funds would be $466,000. Under this proposal, that is actually when they could potentially be competing against. The fund that they would be competing against is our general fund.
Yeah.
It's not gonna come from our streets fund, it would come from our general fund. And, but again, at least in my mind, what this program and this option provides is the staff and the council an opportunity to have a runway to evaluate what that contribution needs to be. Do we need to grow the program? Do we need to shrink the program? Whatever it may be. So while we've estimated $466,000 in year 5 under what has been introduced within the parameters here today, that will likely not be the case in year 5 because we'll have evaluated the system and likely made some changes to it.
Correct. Thank you.
Bob, you had a comment?
Dwayne, could you expand on what you said about the CARES Act funding can only be spent on transit? Is that transit as in public transit like this, or can it be spent on stoplights and
No, it's
roadways
just
and?
No,
Transit systems like we're talking about tonight. It can't be spent on roads or
on
traffic
transit
signals or anything like
systems.
that. Just-
Okay,
Just transit systems.
so pretty much something similar to what
Yes.
we're looking at tonight?
Yes, so
Okay.
if we don't spend it on transit, we just end up losing the
I see.
2.5 million.
Thank you.
You also asked a question about the salary for the transit manager. We did a lot of research on what other groups are paying, and we feel we're competitive with other systems around the state.
Good.
with,
Thank you, Dwayne.
Same with the job description. We looked at other job descriptions and came up with one ourselves.
Anybody else have any other comments or questions?
Just another comment. I really did want to thank, because of course I started on this committee several years ago, and I just wanted to, Amy, your group, and Dwayne and Irene, you've been part of this, and so, it's been a long process, but I really do feel we did our due diligence. We've listened to, the council members, we listened to the community, and I think with this, having the flexible on-demand is really the way to go, and I think people are going to be happy with that, because there were some concerns in the past with the fixed route and how people are going to get there, but I do feel that this is a nice compromise and a good way to start, and like you said, collecting the data,
Yep.
and like our city manager mentioned, we can always adjust as time goes, but I think it's something that has been an interest, and people have expressed, concern that we don't have it here. So, Councilmember McBride mentioned it. Here, we're going to provide this based on the information we've gotten, the funding we have, and then it's up to the community to use these services, and if not, then, if we have to pull back or whatever.
Right.
It's a good way to start.
I-
So thank
and I-
you.
Yeah, and I would agree totally. I like this idea because number one, and I want to remind everybody that as transit's going to change a lot in the next 5 years. And as that changes, and it changes because of a couple things. One is population. If we grow by 20,000 people in the next 5 years, which I expect we will, that changes the whole landscape. And on top of that, technology is going to also dictate how that changes. And it's coming fast. Technology is going to change a lot. So I'm all for not investing in a bunch of buses because I think that's going to be passé, just me personally. But knowing what I know about technology today and don't know about what technology will be like tomorrow, it will change. I do know that. So thank you guys for all the hard work you've done on this and all the time you've spent. I know it's been a lot of work, especially with the SCMPO and Dwayne and Amy. You guys have done a great job, and we appreciate all the work you've done on it. So now, there's no vote here, but directionally, to give staff direction to go forward with this? Is that what you need, Larry?
Mr. Mayor, there is actually no vote this evening. What we were looking for is really a better understanding from council as to whether or not you want us to bring this item back for a formal vote to accept the option.
Okay.
Or if your preference would be for us to move forward to essentially put out the procurement documents for the private hauler, for the private provider, and essentially that be the first action item that mayor and council would be considering.
Yeah, so it will come back to us for a vote, a formal vote.
That's correct.
Okay. I
Could
think
you
I
go
see
back to
everybody's
what
head
was
kind
on
of,
there?
go back to what?
What was just on there showing
The dollars?
dispersion? Yeah.
You go back to the
Yes,
dollars.
right there, thank you. As you look at that, the FTA grant, is that something that would come automatically to us each year, or what's entailed in accessing that grant?
There is a whole bunch of steps to get that grant money. Part of why we really want a transit manager, because there's like 20 steps you have to take, different things like a safety plan and a number of things. But once you have the first time you have the grant, it's usually good for 4 years before you have to go through.
Now, the
apply
CARES
again.
funding is an annual thing?
No, that pot of money is that whole pot, 2.5 million. We could spend that tomorrow if we wanted to. Well,
When you say local contributions, 466,000, is that revenue from picking up people, or is it part of that revenue from picking up riders within the area that we have here, or?
there is a little bit of revenue in those numbers, but it's
pretty minor.
it's a small number, like $60,000 maybe a year or something like that.
I'd like to shake it a little more financially, but I'll be quiet.
And finally, what kind of timeline are we at in terms of, if we go forward, with this and come before the council, what kind of timeline are we looking at?
Well, it'll be a little while because there's a lot of hoops to jump through with FTA. So the first thing we'd want to hire a transit manager to start jumping through all those hoops. That's a 2-3 month process.
Right.
We're
So within a
probably-
year, like a little while means a year?
I would think
or-
a year would probably be a good number. We could do it maybe quicker, might take a little bit longer, but.
You
we'll
can
go
make it
as
happen
fast as
faster,
we can.
Dwayne.
So I think I saw everybody's head shaking, yes, Larry, so I think that council's direction to staff is that let's move forward with this.
So essentially moving forward,
bring
beginning
back-
to recruit for a transit manager and ultimately putting out the bid documents for a private provider.
Larry, on that same thing, could we break it down a little more financially when it talks about local contributions and how Are we gonna break even, are we gonna lose money, or are we gonna, how are we gonna do on this?
And what we can tell you today is that at year 5, based on this option, the general fund will essentially be contributing approximately 466, I believe Amy said between $450,000 and $500,000 for this program at year 5.
So that's
From
for
a
local
practical,
contribution.
and that would come right from the general fund allocation.
Yeah.
From a practical perspective, I believe that we will have evaluated the program and would likely have a better number in probably 2 years to provide a council a better understanding and an opportunity to make a decision as to whether or not you wanted to continue the program as is being introduced this evening, and the costs associated with that.
Bob?
I just wanted to clarify, I thought I misunderstood. Are you saying you will come back to council with a request to hire a transit manager and to do RFPs for contractors?
No, essentially, the transit manager has been included in our fiscal year '22 budget as a new position this year.
Okay.
So it's already in the budget. So essentially, we would, from a staff's perspective, based on that direction, the direction that the mayor just articulated, we would ultimately go out and begin to recruit for a transit manager who then could establish the procurement documents that would be put out on the streets for the private providers. The first item the mayor and council would be considering at that point on transit is an agreement with the lowest, most responsive, most responsible responder. That is one option. The other option is that we can bring back this item as a formal council action at the next meeting and ask the mayor and council to cast a vote on accepting this option and take that direction, that the approval of that vote after the next meting.
I am.
One of
And the
the things you
reason
need to-
being,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Bob.
the reason being, Mayor, is I'm going to support this, but I do have some things I want to say about concerns about it. I didn't know if tonight was the appropriate time to do that. Certainly, if it's coming back for a council action, I can certainly hold my peace until then. But anyway, that's
You can voice your opinion right now.
Well, I agree with you. I'd like to see it come back. The one thing we need to do is be able to explain it to people in the community.
Yes.
We have to understand it enough to do that. And I think, like you say, the community would like to see it happen, but we would all need good answers when people are asking about it, financially and otherwise.
I'm okay either way, Mayor. I can.
Well, Larry, if they'd be more comfortable, and just bring it back as an item on the agenda, and then we'll all vote on it.
Perfect.
Okay?
I appreciate that.
Okay. Yeah, I can go either way, so.
Good man.
All right, so thank you, guys, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time,
Thank
Mr.
you,
Mayor,
Amy.
and members
Yes,
of the
thanks,
council.
Amy.
Happy holidays.
Yep.
too.
Merry Christmas.
All right, no other business in the study session, and we'll stand adjourned until